Hello and welcome to another episode. In today's episode, I am going to be teaching you how to use CSS height and width. But before we get started, if this video is useful for you or for somebody else that you know, don't forget to share it with them. As well, if you like my video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. And if you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. That way you can get notified every time that I upload a video. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so to get started with CSS height and width, we're going to be working with the same website that we have been working so far, which is w3schools.com. I want you to go to the CSS height and width section so we can get started into reading this, and then I'm going to start explaining into what this can do into your code, okay? So CSS height and width. The height and width properties are used to set the height and width of an element. So pay close attention. This is for the element, okay? Now the height and width properties do not include the padding, the borders, nor the margin sections. It sets the height and width of the area inside of the padding, inside of the border, and the margin of the element. So in other words, everyone, these properties are used for the element itself. Now I have here a quick box which is going to explain you this a little bit better. Okay, so let me just pull this up. Okay, so here we go. So let's assume that this is our website, right? And you have a URL here on top. Now, inside of the website, you're going to face, if you have an element, whatever element you have, that element is going to have a content, right? Now, when I'm talking about height and width, is the height and width of the content itself, of that element itself. Now, aside of that, outside of the height and width or outside of the content of the element, then we start with the padding, which is what we saw in our previous chapter. Then after the padding, you will see the border section. And then after the border, you're going to see the margin of that element, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at it into our code so you can go ahead and actually appreciate this a little bit better. But before, I also want to talk about a couple of values that they have. We've seen before margins, we've seen before paddings, and also borders, and each one of them has their own values. So the same thing applies with CSS height and width. They also have the same values, okay? So here we have some of the values that you're going to be looking at with height and width. Some of them will be auto, which is going to be the default. So the browser is the one that calculates the height and width of the element, in other words, right? Then we will have, and you will see the length, which is going to define the height and the width, either in pixels, in centimeters, etc., right? Then you have percentage, which is going to define the height and width in percentage of the containing block, okay? Then you will see initial. Now this initial is going to set the height and width of the element of the initial default value. And then you will see inherit. We've seen this a couple of times now, so it's I'm pretty sure it's going to be very, very easy for you. But this one is going to be inheriting the actual value from the parent element, okay, or from the parent itself, right? So let's go ahead and let's take a look at some examples here. Let's go into our code. Okay, so this is how our code looked like the last time that we were working on it. So what I'm going to do is clear all the CSS style that I've given to the code so far. Okay, I'm going to save this, and I'm actually going to delete the parent, which was div, and we are only going to leave the child, which was just a simple paragraph. So now let's go ahead and let's hit refresh, and this is all we have, right? This is a border example. Actually, let's change that text, and we are going to say height example, okay? Height example. Okay, now we're going to go back to our code, and we are going to, well, let's give it a class. Okay, so let's leave it as border 1. So we're going to call border 1, and we're going to open this right now here. Let's just make sure we save this, and let's see. Okay, the height example. Okay, that changed, so we're good there. So now let's go to style. So if we want to give if we want to see how the style is going to change and actually how the height is going to affect everything in here, what we're going to do first is give it a background color. So let's go ahead and let's say background color. be, let's say it's gonna be blue, okay? I'm going to save this, and now I'm gonna hit refresh. Boom, as you can see, now this has a background color of blue. We're talking about the paragraph itself. That's the element. So now, if we want to give a height to this, let's go ahead and let's say height. And we want to say that the height of this element is going to be 100 pixels. We can do that. And we're going to hit save. And then I'm going to hit refresh. And boom, there you go. So now the height of this element is 100 pixels. Now, we can also give it a width. And let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to give it a width, and the width is going to be 50 pixels only. So watch and see what this is going to do to our element. Okay, so I'm going to hit refresh, and boom, you see? So now it's 100 pixels high, and the width is only 50 pixels. So that is exactly how our code is going to be treated, and this is actually what's going to do the height and width if we go ahead and we add the values in pixels, right? Now, going back to W3 schools here, we have different values, okay? I was using the pixels value, which is the length. Now, we can also set it up as automatic, right? And we can simply say, okay, so height, I want you to be auto, and width, I also want you to be auto, okay? I'm going to hit save, and we're going to go back to our code, and I'm going to hit refresh. And as you can see, this sets it up to automatically the default value that the browser, or I mean the code itself, wants to give to the element, okay? So this is the default value. Now, we also saw another value here. Whoops. And going back here, let's see percentage now. Okay, that's another width value that you will see, which is percentage. Okay, so what does percentage does? Very simple. It's going to give it 10%. Let's just apply 10% of height, and I'm going to apply 5% of width. Okay, so let's hit save. And now going back to our code, hit refresh. And there you go. Now this has 10% of height and 5% of width. So you can also apply the height and percentage. You can also apply the height, as we see here, initial. Okay, so it sets the height and width to its default value. So you can also go ahead and actually say to your code that you want this value to be initial. And as you can see, initial represents the value specified as the property's initial value, okay? So it's the default value, in other words. So let's go ahead and hit save, and let's see what this is going to do to our code. If I hit refresh, boom, the width goes back to its initial value, as you can see. And now the last one that you will see a lot is going to be inherit. And as you may know already, to take a look at inherit, we have to create a parent element, right? And we're going to do that right now. Actually, let's just go ahead and add a width of 50 pixels, and I'm going to change this to 100 pixels, just so you guys can see what this is doing to our code, okay? So let's hit refresh. There you go. So we have a height and width of 100 pixels and 50 pixels, okay? So let's go back to our HTML code, and we're going to create a parent, which is going to be a division, okay? This is going to be the parent element. And we are going to, of course, give it a class. And the class is going to be border parent. Let's just call it border parent for now. I'm going to hit save, and we're going to apply to this border parent some style. Okay, let's go ahead and do the following. I'm going to copy all this, and I will paste it like this. So we're going to change the class, of course, to border parent. And what you guys are going to see now is that the border parent is going to have a background of black, just so we can make a difference between one and the other. And here we're going to give the border, let's actually give 150 pixels, and then the width is going to be 75 pixels. So I'm going to hit save. So watch what this is going to do to our code. The parent element will have 150 pixels of height and the width is going to be 75 pixels. Now the child is going to have only 100 pixels of height, and actually let's make that 50 so you can see it better. And the width is going to be only let's say 25 pixels. Okay, I'm going to hit save. Going back to our web page, we're going to hit refresh. Boom. So as you can see now, the parent, which is the black one, it's at the background one, will have a height of 150 pixels and a width of 75 pixels. And the child is going to have 50 pixels and the width of 25 pixels. Now, if I go ahead and I apply this, and let's say that I want to apply the same height of the parent folder, then we're going to use inherit for that. So this means that this child is going to take the same height that the parent has. Okay, so I'm going to hit save and let's go ahead and hit refresh. Boom, you see? Now the height is the same as the parent element. And it's going to happen the same if I go ahead and I say that the width is going to inherit the width of the parent, which is 75 pixels. Okay, if I hit save, now the black box is going to disappear, but this doesn't mean that it's gone. It actually only means that the child, it's taking the same border height and width that the parent has. So if I hit refresh, boom, you see? Now, so you can see actually what I'm talking about here. Let's go ahead and give it a margin so that you can see the parent and the child element. And to do that, I'm going to give a little bit of margin to both of them, okay? So the margin here, let's say that it's gonna be 100 pixels. And the margin here is going to be, let's just inherit the same margin of the parent. Okay, so let's hit save now and let's hit refresh. Boom, you see now you can see that this is the parent element and this is the child. Both have the same height and width. Okay, and now you can see that because I apply a little bit of margin. What happens is that if you do not give a margin to your elements, what's going to happen is that the first one is going to go in the bottom, then the next one is going to jump on top of it, and so on and so on and so on. So you need to make sure that you know how to control the margin, the borders. You need to make sure that you know how to control the paddings of the elements. That way you know exactly what to do with each one of them, right? And how to position them in the correct order inside of your website. Now, another property that you can also use here in width and height is the max width and max height of an element. What this property does is that it's going to set up the maximum amount of width or height that your element can contain. So you can also, by the way, specify this in the same values that we've talked about so far. You can do this in percentages, you can do this as inherit, you can do this as you want. Now, one thing that you need to be careful and you actually need to pay close attention is that the maximum width will actually override the width of the actual element. Why? Because this is a way that you tell your element, hey, this is the maximum width that I want that my element will have for this, okay? So let me go ahead and give you some examples into our code. And this is not only applies for width, it also applies for height. So as I said before, both of them, okay? So let's take a look into our code. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to delete the parent element here. So we're gonna get rid of the div and we're only gonna leave the paragraph. I'm going to hit save in both. Oh, and I have to change this. Obviously, I have to set up the height, let's say to 100 pixels, and we're going to set the, actually let's do 1000 pixels. 1000 pixels, and I'm going to set up the width to be 1000 pixels as well. And I'm going to delete this. Let's hit save. I'm going to hit refresh, and boom, you see? Here we have the maximum height and width at 1000 pixels. Now, what's going to happen here is that, let's say that I want to have a max width, right? And the max width is going to be only 100 pixels for my window. So if I say that this is going to be only 100 pixels, not 1,000, what this is going to do is that it's not going to allow my window to be at all 1,000 pixels. So if I hit refresh, you see, now my width is changing because I told my browser, hey, I want my maximum amount of width to be only 100 pixels. So it's overriding the previous amount. Now you might be wondering, why would you be using a max amount of width? Or why would you be using a maximum amount of height? And actually, let's apply that so you can see the example before I give you the explanation. Okay, so maximum height, let's say it's going to be only 50 pixels. Okay, let's save this and let's hit refresh. See, it's overriding the 1,000 that we wrote before. Now it's not 1,000, it's 50 pixels. So the main reason that you want to have a maximum width and height of your element is because it actually will make your life easier when you're building your website, right? And let's say that you are going to resize certain elements to certain devices, like your user is going to use and see your website in a phone. Some of them will use them in a tablet. Some of them will use them in a computer. So what you want is to set up a limit sometimes into how big is going to be the element depending on certain devices. So you want sometimes, I don't know, a phone to have just a maximum width of 50 pixels rather than, you know, a big element like a computer to have a higher one. So it'll be in specific scenarios that you're going to be using this, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about this when we build our actually full HTML and CSS website. For now, all you have to know is what they are and how you can use them. So I just gave you an example. I hope it helps a lot. Remember, to learn more about CSS height and width, you have to read, okay? Go to w3schools.com, go to the CSS height and width section, and read a little bit more in there, because there is tons of information that it's available for you there, and it's definitely going to help you out. Now, as you can have a maximum amount, you also can set up a minimum amount, just for you to know. So the minimum amount of width, you can also set it up on your browser. So browser, hey, I want the minimum amount that this width will have at 1,000 pixels as an example. And let me actually show you an example here. Hopefully we have a minimum width. Okay, here is the minimum width property. As you can see, we have here a minimum width of 500 pixels. So there you go. So the minimum width here is none. So this is the default. Now the minimum width here is 500 pixels. So what the minimum width does, it's pretty much set up a minimum amount of width that your element will have. So if the default says it's only 10 pixels, by you stating that my minimum width will be 500 pixels is not going to make it go to 10 pixels. I hope this makes sense to you. But if you have questions about this, make sure to leave them in the comment section below, and as soon as I read them, I will reply with more than pleasure. Okay, everyone, so that's it for this video. If you like it, remember to give me a thumbs up. And if this video was useful for you or for somebody else that you might know, please make sure to share it with them so they can learn as well. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And remember that you can always ask Lixi. Bye everyone, and see you again in the next episode.